I want to thank all the speakers. A question directed probably, well, the panel, but possibly Emmett. When the shipyard expulsion of 1920 happened, you quite rightly said that the rat and prod, so-called, because they were seen as disloyalists, the term used at that time, were put out. I was wondering about their fate. I can see how in a segregated city like Belfast, nationalists would have integrated within their own communities. But the leaders of the Expelled Workers Committee, at the start anyway, were largely composed of some of those trade union leaders. What became of them? I mean, you're talking a substantial amount of people. What were their future fates? Presumably they had to stay in their own areas where they were easily recognised. There'd been high-profile trade unionists and so on. What became of them later? It's just general enlightenment I'm looking.
So what became of people like Councillor James Baird, for example,
Yes.
who were leaders of the expelled workers? He was a Labour Protestant.
He was, yeah. I know about Baird because he ended up in Waterford. Baird, yeah, he was known as Dungaree Baird because he used to wear his working clothes into the City Hall for meetings. He was a councillor, Labour councillor. He took a very brave stand on the expulsions because he proposed a motion that the corporation condemn the expulsions in 1920. And himself and Davy Campbell, I think, were the only Labour councillors to turn up and vote for that. The rest of them, they were too scared to turn up. But Baird, he lost his job as a boilermaker in the shipyards. He was appointed an organiser for the National Sailors and Firemen's Union. About 1921, maybe 22, he took his entire branch over to the Irish Transport and General Workers Union and became an organiser for the ITGW. He was active in the south of Ireland in 1923. He became a kind of leader in the Waterford Farm Strike of 1923. He was a Labour candidate for Dáil Éireann in the general elections of 1923. He polled quite well, but he didn't get elected. In 1924, of course, the union was in severe decline. They were shedding a lot of jobs as organisers, I presume. Baird emigrated to Australia, and he died in Brisbane in 1948.
That's one interesting man. John?
I think a lot of the guys concerned emigrated. There was no work. But the first thing that happened to them was that, with some notable exceptions, I think the Woodworkers Union was one which actually supported its expelled members. The expelled workers had no effective network of support, and they actually find them being supported by the mainly Catholic organiser, indeed organised by the Catholic clergy, the relief committees established both in 1912 and in 1921 to support the expelled Catholic workers. Some went south, and Baird actually did both. He both went south and then ultimately emigrated. And, it's also true that some of the expelled workers were strong supporters of Dáil Éireann's Boycott Belfast campaign. I mean, the Boycott Belfast campaign has been seen as a kind of sectarian strike by Southern Catholics against Protestant Belfast. But actually there were some Protestant expelled workers who'd been thrown out in the most vicious circumstances from their workplaces, who thought that Belfast industry, so long as it was not prepared to reinstate them, and that was the case, that the next option was that they should be boycotted.
Yes, they actually lead a deputation to Dáil Éireann in August 1920, requesting an organised boycott of northern goods and banks, and it really hits the North's really distributing trade. Products like tobacco and soap are badly affected right through to 1922, and eventually it's dealt with under the Craig Collins Pact.
I think that we need to, I think with the benefit of hindsight, we need to recognise that the Belfast boycott was totally counterproductive, and if anything worsened tensions, but we also need to remember some of the reasons why it took place.
There was also a lot of campaigning in Britain from 1920 on behalf of the expelled workers, and a lot of fundraising that was kind of modelled very similarly to the fundraising that was done during the Dublin lockout in 1913, where they held big public meetings, and Baird and people spoke at the rallies and to trade union meetings. So there was quite a considerable amount of fundraising done there.
And at the height of the violence in the North before the Irish Civil War, leading kind of nationalist businessmen, people like Raymond Burke, who was a shipbroker in Belfast, a leading Catholic, went to see Churchill, and they told him in May 1922 that a ghetto was being formed in Roman Catholic Belfast because of the expulsion of skilled workers and apprentices from the arts, that this had really rankled over the last 18 months. And in fact, there were all sorts of efforts to reinstate these people, involvement of Craig, negotiating with Collins, but of course by then you were into the slump, and the chances of reinstating workers became more and more difficult. So that adds to the general sectarian tensions and general violence at that time.